sure that we're all sort of on the same page about what those things mean, and to give us a baseline to work off of, to have hopefully some slightly more interesting conversations that are more management based and management focused. So I might say some things that seem pretty standard or old hat to you, but this way we're kind of all on the same page going forward. Soil health is something that we're going to be referring to throughout today. I think that's kind of like what's driving us all in being here and wanting to work on our management practices around soil. And so there's a variety of different definitions related to that. I'm going to read one out right now. Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans, and beyond, I would say. So I just want to point out a couple things within that definition, I guess. One is the inclusion of sustaining function, so that there is this sustainable function into future generations that carries on past the here and now, and that's an important component, I think, in considering soil health and the way that we manage for soil health. Also, the emphasis on it being a living ecosystem. So to consider the soil not as this inert growing medium, which is something that we've really that's not a new and exciting concept necessarily, but just to acknowledge that that's maybe where we've come from in the way that we've looked at soil and looked at soil systems, that it is alive and contains living organisms as well as supports living organisms. And so in order to support the health of the soil, to consider it as this living entity, I think is really useful, and I think drawing the analogy to the way that we consider other forms of health, like human health, I think is also really helpful. I find that helpful when I'm trying to diagnose situations and problems in a field and understand what's going on. There are certain contexts in which just taking an ibuprofen and being able to move on does work. You can be really simplistic in the way that you approach that issue. But ultimately, if I've got my sore shoulder, I want to figure out what's going on there, and maybe taking an ibuprofen forever and always is not the thing that's going to work forever, and you want to consider it as this more complex system. And the same thing goes for soil. So I just find that a really helpful way to think about soil health, with the emphasis on it being this living entity. And so, related to soil being a living entity, I'm sure that you're all familiar with the sort of rise of soil biology as a theme that's really gained popularity and momentum in the soil science world. I would say even since I was taking my grad school courses, not that long ago, in the last 10 years, that was sort of being had the profile raised on it, and even since then it's even beyond what was being emphasized when I was at school. So it's just a big area that we don't know a lot about and are really working to try to understand more, and are acknowledging the importance of more and more. And I'm sure that that's something that's on everybody's radar here, to be honest. And I'm sure you've all heard the stats of in 1 teaspoon of soil, there's 100 gazillion billion organisms, more than all of these different comparisons. The point being that there's a lot of organisms within a handful of soil. And I think one thing that's important to think about with soil biology is that in there being a lot of organisms and in there being a diversity in those organisms, there's also a functional diversity that hopefully exists, or that we're trying to promote within a healthy soil biological system. And what I mean by functional diversity is basically that there are different types of organisms that are fulfilling similar or overlapping roles. And the reason that I want to highlight that particularly about soil biology and healthy soil biological systems is that the more functional diversity that can be present as a part of that soil biology, the more stable and resilient your soil system is, because you do have those redundancies in a way that are worked into the system. So if you do have an event that causes a lot of disturbance, your system is able to come back from that, or either or be really minimally impacted, either way, to come back really quickly or have minimal impacts, stability and resiliency in response to that thing because of that functional diversity. And so there are lots of different soil organisms. They fulfill a lot of different functions. I'm just going to read a few of them out just so that they're in our minds as we're thinking about some of these management practices going forward here. So soil organisms, they decompose organic compounds. They prevent these organic compounds and nutrients from entering water and becoming pollutants. They sequester nitrogen and other nutrients. They fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and then make that available to plants in plant available forms. Many organisms also, they help to improve soil structure, and the porosity and the aeration and the drainage are all impacted by those things. And also there are soil organisms that can prey on different pests that exist in the soil, so different soil pathogens that could be impacting your crops. They can have an impact on that as well. The other thing I want to mention about soil biology, just that those soil microorganisms, they live in these like micro spaces in the soil. So between different soil particles, between soil aggregates, so sort of these like larger structures that exist in the soil, and in those spaces, they all need certain conditions in which to live. I know this is all very basic, but just to really make sure that it's in our minds as we're thinking about it. So there's they all need access to air. They're going to be impacted by the pH that are in those small microspaces in the soil, in those pores. They're also going to be impacted by the food source that's available to them. I guess this kind of goes along with the air, but also the moisture that's available to them in those spaces. So those are all things just to be keeping in mind what's going on in our soil system and the way that that's impacting the living component of the soil. Okay, I also want to just talk about how, with the different soil properties that we're going to be talking about today, is it okay if I keep talking? Yeah? Okay. There are some qualities or properties to the soil that might be considered inherent to that system, so not really easy to change, or having sort of an impact on that soil that you cannot overcome or alter in entirety. And then there are also soil properties or qualities that are more dynamic, and so you can impact them basically. So, for example, Lydia kind of mentioned the soils here in her garlic planting anecdote. The soils here are very fine in texture, and so there are some aspects to soil management that are inherent to the fact that those soils are really fine in texture. So things like drainage are a much more challenging thing to manage for Lydia under this soil system. And then there are things that she can do, there are management practices that she can take to impact the function of the soil, to impact drainage and aeration. And those things are kind of getting at adding organic matter, or altering the way that she chooses to cultivate her soils. Things that will that management will have an impact on, but inherently there's this fine textured soil that she's not going to be able to change that piece of her system. So that's just another thing to think about. What are the inherent parts of this system versus the dynamic parts that we can try to influence through management? Okay, I've got two more concepts here that I just want to cover. We started talking a little bit about soil organic matter already. Oh. This is the part that's making this interactive. You have to listen to me, but also dodge vehicles. by weight basis, only makes up a very small fraction of most mineral soils. There are also like organic-based soils that are built on old bogs and that sort of thing, so they're in a different category. But for mineral-based soils, we're looking at like 1 to 6% organic matter pretty typically. But even though it makes up such a small fraction of your soil overall, it has a pretty meaningful impact in terms of function of the soil. And so that's why I think soil organic matter gets spoken about a lot, especially within, I would say, like organic management, regenerative management circles. So we're going to be talking about that a lot more later on today as well. So I am curious, just from the group, what are some functions that soil organic matter play within the soil system that you can think of that you're aware of yourself?
Carbon. Yeah, the carbon, drawing down carbon.
Yeah, carbon sequestration, totally. And Amy's going to touch on that a little bit more later as well. So there are certain forms of the organic matter pool that are less dynamic. They're more in this like stable form. And so that's this longer term pool of carbon sequestration. Yeah, great. That's a great example. Any other examples of what soil organic matter do for your soils?
Am I allowed to answer?
No.
It's like the food of the veggies, right? It's like
Yeah, absolutely. So the soil organic matter provides nutrients directly to the soils. A couple other things related to that. Do you want to come and join into the circle? I know the sun's in your eyes. So yeah, they directly provide nutrients to plants, for example. They also provide nutrients to the microbes, which is this active living part of the soil that we've referenced already, and that plays a big influence in terms of the activity that's going on in your soil. And also, soil organic matter, the active sites that it has on its surface and the way that those function, it actually influences the soil's ability to retain more nutrients. So not only is it providing nutrients, but it also is influencing the nutrient retention capacity of your soil on top of that. I'm just going to read out a couple other ones. Soil organic matter also influences the pH buffer capacity of your soils. It provides basically like acts as a binding agent, which influences the structure, which influences the aeration and the drainage and the compactability of your soil. And that also plays into the water retention capacity of your soil. So if you're able to create a variety in pore spaces in your soil, then that will influence the ability to hold onto soil in your system and also the ability to let it drain and leave the system. So there's just a lot of stuff that soil organic matter does, and I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah, we kind of just briefly touched on the fact that there's maybe these different types of organic matter that have a really active role or have a more stable, slow role within the soil system. So the way that they influence the way that carbon is sequestered in the soil can really vary. So you can change your soil organic matter pretty drastically by adding a lot, but that is a very active pool, and so you're also going to have that leave or transform or move on from your soil system pretty quickly too. It's not as persistent in your system. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is the concept of mineralization of nutrients, or making plant nutrients plant available. And this is something that gets talked about and thrown out there, and I think the concept of mineralization is not always like described, so I just want to go through that really quickly. Basically, when we talk about mineralization of a nutrient, we're talking about it going from an organic form and getting transformed through decomposition, oxidation, various processes to become a mineral form of that nutrient. And by becoming mineralized, usually that end form is in a plant available form. So that's what we're talking about when we throw out the term mineralization. And the process by which those compounds are released into these plant available forms is facilitated through soil microbes. And so that's where basically things like soil temperature and soil pH and soil aeration, all of these topics that we've already talked about, because all of these things interrelate, that impacts the soil microbial activity, which is going to impact your mineralization rates and therefore those plant available nutrients that will come out of that process. So just to clarify what we mean when we talk about mineralization. Those are some concepts. I'm just going to say what they were. We talked about soil health, we talked about soil biology, we talked about inherent versus dynamic soil properties, soil organic matter, and then also the concept of mineralization. So that's kind of an information dump to get us started thinking about soil. And what I'd like to do now before I pass things off to Amy is if everybody could get out either your pen and paper or your phone. And we're just going to do sort of a quick reflection activity for you to think about your own farm management practices. So the first question I'm going to pose to you, I'd like you to write down 3 responses to this. What are 3 management choices that you are already making on your operation to encourage soil health in some way? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just do a quick jot down of 3 management practices that you already do. Give yourself some credit for the hard work you're already putting into this. And then we'll check back in. You feel is contributing to soil health in some way.
Cover crop.
Cover crops, yeah, that's a great one, and we'll definitely talk more about that. Excellent.
Like adding organic matter, like a compost pile, like a manure and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these different organic matter inputs that, yeah, either via compost or just manure. One more. Yeah.
Amendments like pH is
Oh, like lime,
Lime,
for
yeah.
example? Yeah. So things that will influence the pH of your soil.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely counts. Yeah, great. Okay, and then the last question that I have for you here is, you're just going to write down one thing this time. What is one soil health aspiration that you have? So basically a management choice that you would most like to implement that you have not already, but in a perfect world, this is this thing that you're really hoping that you can do.
I want to do all winter gardening, like all winter, have a full bed all winter.
Ooh, so like have a living root in the soil all the time.
Yeah, not necessarily cover crop, but something that, like, there's something in there always, all winter.
Great.
Ready for the spring so instead of cover cropping.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd just like to take a moment to go around the circle and have everybody share. So do you mind going next and we'll go around?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out at the end of the season how to give back to the soil essentially, and I don't know. So after the growing season's over, what do I do?
Great.
Yeah.
We're looking to do cover cropping for the first time this winter.
Wonderful. Great.
No weeds.
Sorry, can you say that again?
No weeds.
No weeds. Gotcha.
I think tillage is like the first sin. So like, that humans ever did. So ideally, in an ideal world, would be like extreme reduced tillage or zero till. I think that's totally impossible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, on the scale that we are. But I would love to find ways to reduce tillage yet remain profitable.
Right. Okay. So finding ways to reduce soil disturbance. Okay. I like it. Yeah.
I think in a dream world I would go with Lydia too, but in lieu of that, I think we'd like to start having cover cropping for like a year or multiple years. That's where we are. We have a short growing season, so it's like sometimes it's too late in the fall fall together until we get a cover cropping. Do that and put in the ground
Cool.
multi-year cover cropping.
Great.
I'm pretty small scale, so yeah, no till. That's what we're trying to. I only farm 3/4 of an acre, so no till is more attainable for me than 14 or 15 acres.
Fair enough.
For me, I guess it's just learning how to regenerate like really poor soil conditions in the city, something like that, and then passing that information on to people. So yeah,
Okay.
just learning what that would even look like on a very small scale.
Great. It's trying to like regenerate damaged soils.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm in the same process of trying to understand how to take care of the soil with tillage issues, and in a way I believe that there must be like a right balance. I don't think, I mean, we tend to feel guilty for everything, and then we kind of paralyzed, and then
Right. Sometimes we kind of.
overdo it, like,
Yeah.
you know, like, seems like we wrong concepts or things there. Like, I was looking at this movie, am I saying too much, or is it okay to expand a little bit?
I think that that's probably good for now. Maybe, yeah, we'll have lots more conversation going forward. Okay, so one thing that I just want to point out from that kind of go around the circle is already we're identifying some people that have some things in common in terms of what they're aspiring to. I heard someone say that they're wanting to do cover cropping for the first time, and someone saying, you know, one of the things they're already doing is cover cropping. And so what I'm hoping that we can accomplish by actually having people together in one location, what a concept for this season, to actually be able to connect over those things. So just try to identify people that are here that you might be able to connect with and like draw on them as a resource person in different ways. I think that's a really valuable part of today. I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Amy. Cool.